The coalition today released its pre-election spending commitments and how it's going to pay for it. Now, the interesting part about this is that $3.3 billion in cuts to the federal public service. But of course, that comes at the same time that there's significant pressure for wages to rise right across our community. So that being said, tomorrow we see a bit more with the wage price index, the quarterly number, being released. And this is the one the Reserve Bank has been waiting for. Economists say it will be up by around 2.5% in the past year. And on the surface, you'd imagine the Reserve Bank wouldn't be too worried about that. On Thursday, the unemployment numbers come out and the government will be hoping that it falls below 4%. In other words, with a 3 in front of it, before the federal election. So let's bring in here Warren Hogan, independent economist and also an advisor to the small business lender Judo Bank. Warren, many thanks for your time as always. So, this is the whole point. If this number tomorrow, the wages number, comes in at 2.5%, everybody might look back at the Reserve Bank and say, well, hang on, did you press the panic button? I don't think they did, but I'd have to say that it's really a case in point that they were waiting to see this number. That's what they kept saying.
Yeah, well, they did say in their minutes today that they decided not to wait for this number because their anecdotal evidence from their liaison and their business surveys they look at are all telling them wages are moving. And of course, we all know this from speaking to businesses. And this number tomorrow isn't going to show up the wage pressures we're seeing in the economy today for another year. It's just the way it's constructed. It takes a long time to filter through. So I wouldn't expect too much out of tomorrow's number. The annual rate, as you said, will be very low. I think it's quite irrelevant, actually. What we'll find in a year or so is that it's probably up around 4%. The best thing we can do is look at the quarterly or maybe the 6-monthly rise, annualise that out, and that'll give us some indication of whether there's an acceleration in wages growth happening at the moment.
But the one thing that both political parties are banking on in this election campaign is that people can keep their jobs. So we see the employment numbers coming out on Thursday. And again, if it goes into the 3s, well, that's fantastic, right? It's good for people. It's good for the government. It means people have got jobs and, indeed, they're more easily able to cope as interest rates rise and their mortgage, if you like, payments also increase. So this is the key right now, isn't it? To try and make certain you don't hit the economy too hard or too soft right now. It's a very delicate balancing act.
It is, Ross, and it's the ultimate balancing act in the economy. We're always doing it, trying to get that trade-off between a not too hot or not too cold labour market, keeping inflation in check. This number on Thursday, the monthly employment number, is a really important number, not just for the election but for the economy. And all the forward indicators are telling us that we're going to get more jobs created, we're going to get a growth in total employment, and unemployment is going to be comfortably below 4 either this month or within a few months. In fact, I can see unemployment moving down into the low 3s, which I think is unsustainable, but is likely to happen by the end of the year.
Yeah, it raises questions about where full employment is as well. Well, both of the potential treasurers, Josh Frydenberg and Jim Chalmers, were out. So let's go and have a listen to what Josh Frydenberg had to say today.
What we have done is put 35 policies forward for costing, and Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers have put a big fat 0. And thousands, hundreds of thousands of Australians are voting right now. And they're not able to see the cost of Labor's policies. What is Anthony Albanese hiding from? The answer is proper scrutiny.
And it is true, Warren. I mean, let's be honest, politicians on both sides always play this little dance just before the election. Normally the costings happen just before the election is basically held. 2 days, they're 4 days beforehand. So, really there's not much difference, significant difference. But the one point he makes is in this election, so many people are voting ahead of time and potentially before they've seen all of the policies.
Well, I think that's critical, Ross, is that we've already seen millions of votes cast and we haven't seen the ALP's costings. And it is the ALP's costings that we're all considering. We know what the government's numbers broadly are. They just had a budget. So the fact that their costings today came within a couple of billion of what they said a few months ago, or even a few weeks ago, is not to be surprising. I think that the costings should be released a lot earlier, before the pre-polls start, because I suspect that what we're going to see with the ALP on Thursday is quite a substantial hit to the budget. And of course, this is actually the big missing part of this election campaign, is the fact that neither parties are trying to get our budget back into balance, back into order.
Nobody, Warren. And that's one of the great disgraces, that nobody has actually worked out how we bring it back to surplus, how we go down a path of austerity, what happens if there is indeed a need to cut. I'll tell you what, while we've got this, let's go to the Alternative Treasurer. That is Jim Chalmers. He was also speaking today. Here's what he said.
Well, we'll release all of our costings on Thursday in the usual way at the usual time. The most important thing here is not whether deficits are a couple of $1 billion each year, better or worse than what the government is proposing. What matters most is the quality of the investments. We'd be inheriting $1 trillion in debt and no plan to grow the economy the right way.
So, Warren, is it true that if there is significantly more spending by a Labor government, it puts more pressure on inflation and therefore more pressure on the Reserve Bank to raise interest rates even higher?
Oh, most certainly. And that's a very possible scenario in the next 2 or 3 years, because although the inflation we're seeing right now is coined as transitory or temporary, there's no guarantee that that's the case. We still haven't seen a peak in inflation necessarily overseas. And of course, if it proves to be a little bit stickier than some would suggest, then of course a stimulatory fiscal policy is only going to make matters worse. So I think we've got a big wake-up call coming on the economy for this next term of government. And whoever wins has got a much bigger challenge coming down the pipe than either of them are considering right now.
There you go. Warren Hogan, always great to have you in the program. We'll talk to you a little later in the week.